Jai Guru, everyone. Jai Guru.
Jai Guru.
Welcome to this episode of Minute by Minute, the Awake podcast. This is minute 60. I'm hosting today, and we have a guest with us alongside Mike and Priyank. Our guest is Philip. Philip, hi. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Maybe you would do the honor and give a quick introduction to yourself. Tell us a little bit.
I'm Phil from the UK. I'm a holistic health coach. I like to work with spiritual people because when they improve their health, their spiritual path improves also. So really passionate about this kind of work. In terms of the spiritual path, should I talk about how Guruji found me?
Yeah, sure. Crack on. Yeah.
Yeah. I know you ask that question sometimes. So kind of by chance, I was in the Andes in Peru. Kind of happened to be there by accident, and my first ever kirtan, I met somebody, got talking to them, and then we went our own ways. And then a few days later, I bumped into this person again just by chance, and we ended up then living in the same kind of little spiritual community. And I just happened to say, I've not read a good book for a while. You can't really buy good books here. And he said, I've got a book in my bag. I've had it for about a year and I haven't read it, but I think you would love it. He'd only known me a few days, and he gave me the autobiography. There are a few more details to it than that, but many strange little coincidences happened for the book to come to me. As always, everybody has their own story about him.
Yeah,
that's so cool. This guy had his book like in the back for a year.
Yeah, never read it. He still hasn't. We're good friends now, and I always, I text him from time to time, and when we speak, and I'm like, "Thank you so much for giving me that book." I mean, if you didn't, someone else would have, but it was you, so thank you.
Yeah. He was just a carrier of a message for you, unbeknownst to him for all that time. I'm curious, did he himself go back and read the book, or is it not his time yet?
Yeah, as far as I know, he hasn't yet, but he's asked me about it a few times, and his spiritual path, it's been quite challenging for a while, and I don't push it on him at all, but when he asks me about it and I tell him what it's doing for me and everything, it's like, I need to do that. I need to read the book, and I probably need to do Kriya Yoga.
Maybe your example will maybe bring him onto the path. Who knows?
I hope so, yeah.
Do you work with Ayurveda with regards to the holistic side of things?
It's funny you mention that. Professionally, not yet, but I am. It's something I've been working with on myself for a few months. It goes hand in hand with yoga, right? They both come from the same scriptures. They both come from the Vedas. So for me, if I'm, following the yoga meditation, the Kriya Yoga path, then that's the logical diet for me. I think in the future it will transition more into that.
Nice. Yeah, it's a very interesting path, but plenty to get into there. In terms of the Awake documentary, Philip, when was the first time that you watched it, and what were your first impressions?
I think I watched it for the first time about 5 months ago. The whole documentary kind of blew me away. Like, I wasn't expecting there to be much footage of Guruji, but it was really well done. I've read a lot about him as well now at this point, but the documentary really does give a lot of information that's not out there, but very beautiful. We're going to get into this topic in the podcast in a bit, but just seeing him and Sri Yukteswar Giri together, like that's captured on film. Wow. That's amazing. So yeah, amazing movie. I watched it again yesterday just to refresh the mind. Just as powerful as the first time.
Nice. We do like guests that come prepared. That's great. Good stuff. Well, thanks for joining us. We do have a packed minute, and it's filled with, as you mentioned, Philip, great photos and films. I think mainly taken by Richard Wright, if that's correct, who was the secretary for Guruji, and followed him with a camcorder at the time and camera. So really, in this minute, we're going to cover three main topics, and we were discussing just before we hit record on this meeting that we probably could do an hour or more, quite comfortably on each subject, but we'll push through and hopefully cover a lot of ground. But the first one is really a continuation of Guruji's trip to India, where he meets the Mahatma Gandhi, as well as seeing scenes where he reconnects in physical form with his own master, Sri Yukteswar Giri. And we hear the narration of Guruji's comments regarding Gandhi, and then as well, we see Richard Wright. So that's the third topic, let's say, Richard Wright in here, in video and audio, describing the meeting between Guruji and Sri Yukteswar Giri. So, as I mentioned, there's so many beautiful pictures and scenes depicted, videos of Guruji, doing some nice shots of him kind of walking and looking back, and there's this narration coming in to say to set the scene essentially for this minute. Now, Guruji was traveling to India with a few others, and he says in the narration that we broke our journey halfway across the continent to see Mahatma Gandhi. After great discussions, he took lessons, Kriya, and recharging exercises. I was touched by his spirit of inquiry. When we prayed together, the whole place seemed filled with God. So that gives us plenty to talk about just in that one sentence. But first, maybe we can talk a little bit about Gandhi himself. And a question popped into my mind when I was looking into this. Gandhi, I'm sure everybody's familiar with Gandhi. He's a great soul, which is what Mahatma means. And his statue is just sitting outside of the British Parliament building in London, which I always thought was a nice touch, certainly given the history of what unfolded and what happened. So he was always somebody in my mind that I was aware of. But Priyank, is Gandhi and the history of his actions and who he was, is that taught in schools in India? I'm curious to know.
Yes, very much so. And with a very revered kind of angle in terms of Mahatma, he's treated as a saint, and that's certainly how he's respected amongst the majority of the community in India. There is certain right-wing elements, I suppose, that dislike him because of his diverse views on respect for other religions. The right-wing elements think that he should have stuck to Hinduism, and obviously that's how he got assassinated as well. Yeah, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, you have to imagine the time when India was struggling for its independence, and then imagine other countries struggling for their independence, and then you would wish for a leader after this time, that builds the country up and does well for the country, is not corrupt, and I think he's probably the best thing that any country could ever have wished for, right?
Certainly fitting for India, with the heritage, the spiritual and philosophical heritage such as India, for the standout figure in its modern history to be Gandhi is fitting, isn't it, for the heritage of the nation in terms of its spiritual wealth.
Yeah,
Gandhi is
shows a good karma that India has, right?
Absolutely, and something in the soil, perhaps. But no, he's probably one of. Yeah, I used to revere him when I was up till even now, I suppose. I've read so many of his books, and I went to his ashrams in India, and to the extent that I used to try and be like him, and my friends used to think me too at school and university. They thought I was too what's the word?
Devoted.
Disciplinarian in terms of this is the way to do it, this is how to do it. They used to say, oh, there's Gandhi again, at it again, that. So he used to use it in jest, even though it should really be a compliment for a spiritual aspirant to be. But it's not so in the way that people do it.
He was a lawyer, right? He had his own practice, very successful practice. That he was a renunciant really from that, right? And we can get into that in a little bit, but he was certainly not somebody to mess with, was he? You know, when you think of a spiritual leader, he was really as hard as they came. You know, winning many political debates and so on and so forth. He didn't back down from a fight, and that really is his fighting spirit is what made him, I suppose, get to victory in what he was trying to achieve. But I'm curious, you know, he's such a unique figure in history, isn't he? Non-violence, and he really meant that in every sense of the word, didn't he? With everything that he practiced, with, you know, as I mentioned, maybe food, to you know, overthrowing the British Empire at the time. He really meant non-violence as a method, and that's what came through. So somebody who was, you know, a giant amongst men, and not many countries can claim that they have such a rich history to kind of learn from. So yeah, I was wondering, is this like something that is like, you know, in every school in India? Because if it's not, it's like yeah, they're missing something maybe. But really, you know, in the documentary we see really nice shots. Again, I think they maybe were taken by Richard Wright with Gandhi and his cohort, and then Yogananda at Gandhi's ashram and home, seemingly enjoying himself very much so, smiling and making himself at home. And I think he's pouring himself a drink, washing his hands or something. So some really nice shots there. And we have maybe a few bits to kind of draw on here. One of the texts that we can draw on in terms of, you know, Yogananda meeting Mahatma Gandhi, almost said Mahavatar Babaji there, is he's on my mind, is the autobiography of a yogi. Now, one thing that was quite cool about Mahatma Gandhi was that he took a vow of silence. So one day a week he didn't speak at all. So he used pen and paper or pencil and paper, and he would write what he wanted to say. And that was the day, apparently, whenever Yogananda came to visit Mahatma Gandhi. So Mahatma Gandhi welcomed him with, you know, a big broad smile, a very warm, affectionate embrace, and then wrote to him, welcome. So this was written to Yogananda. So that, even, you know, with Yogananda, you would think, would he ever maybe break this vow of silence at times, you know, but he didn't at all. He was very regimented on that. But I'll continue in a minute, but Priyank, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so the definition of, I think his definition of ahimsa, non-violence, is non-intention to harm in thought, word, and deed. So this fasting one's an interesting one. So, like, you know, in each of those, you won't break your vow in some small way. i.e., if a mosquito lands on you, you might think to, oh, let me swat it. But if you're having a fast of words, i.e., not speaking, then there's no way, you know, that one element of ahimsa, you're going to follow it to the letter, aren't you? Because you're not speaking. Because as we know, when we project something by speech, there's a further emphasis energetically and metaphysically in terms of what happens. So if you think it as one thing, saying it as another thing, doing it is another thing as well. So I was at a silent retreat in Godalming this weekend, and one of the precepts was that you don't talk. It's a silent retreat. So my wife and I went with lots of members from the London Centre, and one of the great things about that retreat is that there's no talking. You know, the communion we have, you know, you sit and meditate with everyone, and you may sit next to someone, but there's no physical or gross communion. It's all you know, of the higher order.
Yeah, epic. I haven't done it. I have heard friends of mine that have been on a week-long retreat and things like this where they didn't speak, and I think after some time you realize just how habitually attached you are to maybe expressing yourself in such small ways that maybe distract you from that inner peace and so on and so forth. But Mike, what do you think? Do you think that you could implement this in your life one day a week? How do you think that would go done at work? Or is it easier now that everybody's working remotely? Is this something we should all do?
Impossible. No, I think it's definitely something to embrace, but it's I feel like it's a very high standard to set in a work environment. I don't think it would work where I'm used to working that well. I mean, you can always type and write emails, and a lot of that happens anyways. Yeah, you can probably, but it's making people understand why this is important, why this is a good thing. I feel like this is a very high good to convey. Maybe, yeah, if you have a company with devotees, then I would totally suggest that. I mean, Guruji says, for example, we should be silent during meals, right? That is already something that I find, like, you know, when you go to a work lunch, for example, you probably, depending on your type of work, you probably didn't talk that much the whole day, and now finally you get to catch up with your peers. Yeah, it definitely goes against our instincts, but it's a bit like fasting does as well, right? Like when you don't eat. So it's something, maybe we'll see this more in the future, but for now I haven't seen anything like that in my work environment.
No, totally. It's something we've talked about before, like the kind of distractions and the modern day life, and how you actually fit the yoga practice into the demands of society. And this is one that it's just intense. I remember doing a silent day for charity when I was at school, and I actually got pulled in by one very skeptical headmaster character who thought he wanted to see what I was doing with the money that I was raising, and he interrogated me for like 30 minutes, interrogated me in his room, trying to get me to talk. And I just remember just refusing to talk, just writing everything down. So you know, it's just a very odd thing, I think, for people to be doing, but it's clearly something that really works for Gandhi, that we'll get into in a minute. But one thing that I was reading in my research for Gandhi was his take on the caste system in India. And, you know, it's something I was not familiar with growing up in Northern Ireland, but he really battled the caste system in its rigidity and how it was delivered. And I took a little bit of text out of the autobiography of a yogi. Maybe Priyank, if you're kind enough to read, we can kind of learn a little bit more about what this is and what Gandhi did to resolve some of the issues in there.
Yeah. It says in the modern Madras presidency, the non-violent ideals of Mahatma Gandhi have had great headway. The white distinguishing Gandhi caps are seen everywhere. But in the South, generally, the Mahatma has effected many important temple reforms for untouchables, as well as caste system reforms. The original caste system, formulated by the great legislator Manu, was admirable. He saw clearly that men are distinguished by natural evolution into 4 great castes. Those who are capable of offering service to society through bodily labor are Shudras. Those who serve through mentality, skill, agriculture, trade and commerce, and business life in general are Vaishyas. Those who are talents in administrative, executive, protective, rulers and warriors are Kshatriyas. Those who are contemplative nature, spiritually inspired and inspiring, are Brahmins. Neither birth, nor sacraments, nor study, nor ancestry can decide whether a person is twice born, i.e. a Brahmin, the Mahabharata declares. Character and conduct only can decide. Manu instructed society to show respect to its members insofar as they possess wisdom, virtue, age, kinship, or lastly, wealth. Riches in India were always despised if they were hoarded or unavailable for charitable purposes. Ungenerous men of great wealth were assigned a low rank in society. Serious evils arose when the caste system became hardened through centuries into a hereditary halter. Social reformers like Gandhi and the members of very numerous societies in India today are making slow but sure progress in restoring the ancient values of caste based solely on natural qualification and not on birth. Every nation on earth has its own distinctive misery-producing karma to deal with, and India too, with her versatile and invulnerable spirit, shall prove herself equal to the task of caste reformation.
It's nice. When I read this, I thought it's educational for me, but then my next thought was, which one would I fall into? The bodily labor, you know, sutras. You know, would I be a Brahmin? Probably a pass on that one. That to somebody else. What do you think, Priyank? Which one would you fall into?
I'd see myself as a bit of all of them through the various parts of my life and various parts of the day. I think I sway in and out of each of those qualities.
This may also be true, indeed. So yeah, Gandhi really was fighting these rigid, really deeply embedded systems in India, and this is, you know, something that makes him a great individual, not just overthrowing the British Empire, which he went on to do, but really tackling some of the issues that India has at the very heart of India. Mike, do you want to jump in?
I want to mention one thing, and then I want to ask one thing that Priyank might be able to answer. So there's one thing that Gandhi was always wearing a loincloth, right? And he was wearing the loincloth to show his kinship to the lowest caste, right? Because they would have no more than that. So, and then at some point Gandhi said, if I was born again, I want to be born as a pariah among pariahs, right? Because that way I can serve them the best, right? That's the kind of humble attitude he had. And then there's this whole issue that Gandhi addressed with the untouchables, right? That there's a caste of people that you are not supposed to associate with, but they work as servants, or they work, or if they even work. And how does that is that also a caste in the caste system, or is that even below it? How does that work, Priyank?
So there's yeah, you're thinking of Dalits. So the Dalits are a subcaste of a Shudra, and the Shudra i.e. service to humanity. But they obviously the word Dalit is not a word that's used in the Bhagavad Gita, for example, or any of our scriptures. But it's a modern invention. For example, my own caste, I'm a Patel. Patel is actually associated with, you know, agriculture and trade, and within that caste we live our Patel. So there's like, you can see how these kind of like tiers are broken up, and it's basically the modern construct. So the spiritual, you know, thing that we just read out there, where the actually, you know, qualities that you have has just been broken up crudely into which community or society are you born into, which is obviously the root of the problem.
Yeah, it sounds like a very divisive thing, but I suppose, given what you read out there, Priyank, that was from the autobiography of a yogi, and that was our guru talking about the caste system. It did maybe once upon a time, or still maybe today, have a purpose, and actually have a positive purpose to help structure, I suppose, how one might operate in the world and assist others. Because I think one common issue, I think, growing up, I've realized is the ability to project on the others what you feel like you are and you know yourself, and that might not be necessarily the case, but that's coming from a Western perspective that didn't grow up with the concept of reincarnation, so on and so forth. Mike, do you want to jump in?
I don't think that's purely an Indian thing. Like in Europe, for example, we had the concept of the guilds in the medieval times, right? And they were very much similar in the way that you grew up as the son of a carpenter, so you're going to be a carpenter, and you know, and they were also tiered and everything, and I feel like in the Dark Ages, this was kind of then there was a notion to categorize people like that. And I guess in India, this kind of guild system got mixed in with the caste system and created this kind of very sophisticated version of it.
Priyank.
Yeah, it does also serve or it did serve a beneficial purpose as well, because there's a very kind of refined laws that people belonging to each caste should have, i.e. the qualities that they should aspire to have, things like selflessness, like a Shudra, serving your community, doing it in a selfless way. And so there's like laws within the caste, and it does also work in many aspects. For example, intercaste marriage wasn't necessarily a big thing. So Brahmin wouldn't marry a Shudra. And even now, that's a thing in India. But for whatever means, it almost works because, for example, when like my wife and I we're both Patels, and we belong exactly to the same caste. So when after we got married, like there was no issues in terms of how our families and our customs and how we maintain the house, the kitchen, hygiene, all this kind of stuff is virtually identical, even though we're completely independent families from different parts of Gujarat. So obviously when you get married, as Chris will tell you, there's a lot of things to lots of challenges, and these crude things like household customs and hygiene are just like the tip of the iceberg to what you do have to resolve. But if those things are already agreed, harmonious, then you can work on the more difficult spiritual harmonizing and resonating.
That's interesting. So your wife was already, her last name was already Patel before you guys got married.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Said no double barrel or name changes required.
Patel.
She could have done Patel.
Very convenient. Very convenient.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Death by 1,000 cuts if you don't agree with how to wash the dishes and cut, peel the potatoes.
Especially in an Indian household, you'd be shocked.
Yeah. No, it's very important. I think there's certainly something to that. Reading about Mahatma Gandhi, there's just everything is quite awe-inspiring. And one thing that I read was he gave up more of $20,000 of an income and give away all of his wealth to the poor. $20,000 in 1927 or around about that time is over $300,000 today. And earning that in India as well is exceptional, really exceptional. Would you guys be able to give up 300K income to support the poor in your area? It's such a substantial thing to do. It just takes my breath away. He lived a life of a renunciate. And this kind of brings me on to the question of we talked about the initiation from our guru to Mahatma Gandhi into Kriya, and was Gandhi already practicing yoga beforehand? I think categorically yes, I can say. But before I jump into that, Philip, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think he was almost the perfect yogi even before his initiation, right? He'd mastered yama niyama, practicing ahimsa, internal and external renunciance, so many things in his life. Like he was a vegetarian. He did, if anything, he meditated, he prayed. He did everything almost. He was doing the sadhana almost, but maybe without the powerful technique of Kriya Yoga.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll see if anybody's read the autobiography of a yogi. I'm guessing, I know we all have. I presume actually I haven't asked you, Philip, but I presume you have inside and out. You'll see so many stories between Master and Lahiri Mahashaya. when Master was staying with Lahiri Mahashaya, I'm getting my names mixed up today. Mahatma Gandhi, he really saw that Mahatma Gandhi lived a very disciplined life, and talking about Ayurveda before regarding food, he was showing that he was very much detached from body and mind, and he was able to eat, very bitter neem leaves with joy, whereas Yogananda mentions that he remembers eating it with sort of disdain when he was younger, to some degree. But yeah, so he was able to, certainly consume without any issues, and relish what others would turn away from, for the benefit of his body, for purity and simplicity. Michael, would you want to jump in?
Gandhi was definitely a very advanced spiritual being. Guruji referred to him a few times as saint, right? And he mentioned this one occasion where Gandhi is having a surgery without anesthetic and having a chat with his disciples or followers while it's going on. I mean, that's pretty hardcore, right? And I find the him asking Yogananda for the Kriya Yoga of Lahiri Mahashaya is, on the one hand, Gandhi bowing before Lahiri Mahashaya, Sri Yukteswar, and Yogananda, but also him respecting it, right? And him promoting it. So I feel like this is this is two saints coming together, and Yogananda very much in awe of Gandhi, and Gandhi for the role that he plays, right, in liberating India, and Gandhi bowing before Yogananda for the role of him promoting the ancient teachings of India around the world.
Sure. Maybe, Mike, you would be able to jump into one of the cards and read a short passage.
Sure.
Under the would Gandhi already been practicing yoga beforehand? There's a Mr. Desai, is that how I'm pronouncing that? The secretary of Mahatma Gandhi.
Yeah.
You could read that card.
Mr. Desai writing in Wright's diary, that one?
Yes.
Observing Mr. Wright's travel diary, Mr. Desai opened a page and wrote on a list of satyagraha, vows taken by all the Mahatma's strict followers, satyagrahis: non-violence, truth, non-stealing, celibacy, non-possession, body labor, control of the palate, fearlessness, equal respect for all religions, Swadeshi, the use of home manufacturing, freedom from untouchability. These 11 should be observed as vows in the spirit of humility. Gandhi himself signed this page on the following day, given the date also, August 27, 1935.
Epic. He already had his ashram and his devotees himself, following principles that he laid out. He studied basically every major religion out there, so he was very well versed. But Priyank, could you read on Kriya Initiation for the autobiography of a yogi? So we'll look at the history of that a little bit.
Yes. So on the previous night, Gandhi had expressed a wish to receive Kriya for the Kriya Yoga of Lahiri Mahashaya. I was touched by the Mahatma's open-mindedness and spirit of inquiry. He is childlike in his divine quest, revealing that pure receptivity which Jesus praised in children. Of such is the kingdom of heaven. The hour of my promised instruction had arrived. Several satyagrahis now entered the room. Mr. Desai, Mr. Dr. Bengali, and a few others who desired the Kriya technique. I first taught the little class the physical yoga exercises, i.e. energization exercises. The body is visualized as divided in 24 parts. The will directs energy into each in turn to each section. Soon everyone was vibrating before me like a human motor. It was easy to observe the rippling effect on Gandhi's 20 body parts, at all times perfect, completely exposed to view. Though very thin, he is not unpleasingly so. The skin of his body is smooth and unwrinkled. Later, I initiated the group into the liberating technique of Kriya Yoga.
It's an epic little passage, isn't it? And I just love the first part of that, where he mentioned how childlike Mahatma Gandhi was. He was open-minded and willing to take on Kriya, from Yogananda. Obviously, he was a very realized individual in his own right, and as I mentioned, he had his own devotees of sorts following his principles and practices. So it's somebody who has no ego, right? When I was reading that through, he could have easily said, "Hey guys, I'm doing pretty well myself. I know what I'm doing. Maybe we can do some things together and pray and chant." But he really did, totally give himself to Yogananda, and with humility. I just thought that was such a great passage. Mike, do you want to jump in?
Yeah. So one of the disciples, like you said, Gandhi had his disciples, and one of the things that Guruji also mentions is one of the things that he did with his marriage was turn his wife into his disciple, and Guruji calls it a rare miracle, because of course this is not the kind of relationship that a marriage is like. So that's another point of how great a person he was.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to Priyank, what you were mentioning there about husband and wife and the relationship there. And I was reading again recently the old lesson 47, I think it is, and it talks about magnetism. And in that lesson, not to go into too much detail, but simply says that the true test of your magnetism is within the household, within the loved ones that you're closest to. And if you simply would speak sweetly, never say unkind words, and many other principles of soul magnetism, you'll be a hero amongst your loved ones and so on. And reading in the autobiography of Yogi, there's a great passage that Yogananda describes that Mahatma Gandhi's wife, it's a statement essentially saying how great Mahatma Gandhi is, thanking him for being who he is. And there's no better hallmark. When I was reading that, I thought it's quite coincidental that the wife would then turn and say just how she's in awe of who Mahatma Gandhi is. And she just thanked him over and over again for the lessons and for being who he is. So I thought that was another good point, Mike. Well made. So really, we can look at more Mahatma Gandhi pieces. Priyank, you've gathered a few cool quotes from Mahatma Gandhi. Do you want to go through them? Read some of them out?
These are not just quotes. These are like personally, they're very moving for me. So, for example, this first one is in the back of his autobiography of his autobiography, which incidentally is a quote in itself, because his autobiography is called the story
Experiments with Truth.
Yeah, the story of my experiments with truth. So how modest how modest a title to an autobiography. And yeah, as he said, it's not really an autobiography, but on the back of that book, it says, "I have nothing new to teach the world. Truth and non-violence are as old as the hills," which is pretty phenomenal, isn't it? Probably one of the most influential figures in the last few centuries, and he's saying he's got nothing new to say. It's just phenomenal. then I remember the salt march that he did, where that he was revolting against the salt tax that really hit the poorest in India hardest, because obviously they relied on salt, as do most people. But they did the march all the way to the coast. It was like 100-kilometer walk or something, and gathering troops along the way, of which I think no, it's not. And then when he got it, apparently he said, when we got to the ocean, he picked up the salt in defiance to the salt tax. You can't tax something that I can pick up and consume. So he picked it up and he said, with this salt, I am shaking the foundations of the British Empire. And that certainly made headlines across the world. I think that was a very powerful one. And I think this one is probably more akin to like Mike more than anyone I know, which is, he says, live as if you were to die tomorrow, learn as if you were to live forever. The latter point, Mike.
Am I going to die tomorrow?
Your font. you live that way. So the latter point, learn as if you're to live forever, I think is very inspiring, and I love that. And this one, people even use this today. Where they say revenge, they justify revenge sometimes, where they say, "Oh, eye for an eye, it's fine." Whereas Gandhi put that on his head and he said, "An eye for an eye will only make the whole world blind," which I absolutely love. And the other one that I love is oh yeah, Mike, when you come in before I.
No, there's just a quote that I'm not really sure if he actually ever said that, where they asked him, "What do you think of Western civilization?" And he said that would be a great idea.
Yeah, and in and the other thing that he turned on his head is, where like he said, does the common thing where the end justify the means, i.e. if you've got a noble goal, then you can do whatever you want to get there. But he turned that on his head and he said, if one takes care of the means, the end will take care of itself. I think that is, the implications of that philosophy is just phenomenal, because that means that you give no emphasis on the result whatsoever in any walk of your life. You just do the thing that you're supposed to do, and you do it to the best of your ability. And then he's saying, if you do that, then the result will come. And that's not necessary. The result is not necessary that the outcome that you wanted, but the outcome is your spiritual liberation. So you may not get the outcome, but yeah, in terms of the overall, the grander picture, I think that's certainly true. And in terms of like the, he made the whole freedom movement his own, the independence movement, about himself. So he was concerned about doing everything that was right. He could have taken shortcuts. So like he had that much influence that he could have toppled every single British, they could have physically by force toppled every single British officer in the country, right? Because he had that much influence. But that would be the incorrect means. And he wanted to secure independence the right way. And even if that meant that independence wasn't secured, it wouldn't, that was the extent to which he was willing to go to, which how many politicians can live up to such a insanely high standard of ideal. It's just a crazy one. And this last one is about the Bhagavad Gita. Chris, do you want to read? Philip, do you want to read that?
Yeah, sure. When doubts haunt me and disappointments stare me in the face, and I see not one ray of hope on the horizon, I turn to the Bhagavad Gita and find a verse to comfort me. I immediately begin to smile in the midst of an overwhelming sorrow.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And if you go to Gandhi's ashram, there's this book which is called the Bhagavad Gita, which I don't think you can get online, but it's basically a collection. He used to read like one verse of the Gita day for his, in front of all the students and all the residents of the ashram, and he used to then just talk about what it means to him and to the freedom movement and to their little ashram. So it's a beautifully personalized rendition of the Bhagavad Gita that it's just phenomenal, because like say a certain incident would happen in the ashram the previous day, and then the Gita verse would come up and he'd be like, okay, so this happened, but look what Krishna is saying to Arjuna here, and if we'd done this, then this is what the outcome would have been. And it's just absolutely phenomenal. I'd highly recommend you. It's just such a sweet take on the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, Mike?
You just mentioned his ashram. Is that the ashram in Wardha where Guruji also went, or is it another one?
No, this is the one in Sabarmati, which is in Ahmedabad. Yeah, so he has many ashrams. The main one, the biggest tourist attraction one, is in the middle of the city, which is Ahmedabad, the capital of India. Oh yeah, and the other thing I was gonna say was you guys have probably seen the Ben Kingsley film Gandhi, which I think was a phenomenal portrayal based on how much I've read of the varying accounts of Gandhi's life. I thought it was a phenomenal portrayal. And Ben Kingsley is obviously someone that we're very, very keen about, in terms of he did a beautiful narration of the autobiography of Yogi, the most famous narration, I think, and he did it so eloquently. Yeah, Mike?
No, actually, you go on. I'll interject later.
Yeah. So in that film, interestingly, he when Gandhi is shot by Godse, his assassin, of which I think there'd been previously many attempts to assassinate him, and Gandhi, one of his ideals is that he shouldn't be afraid, because if he's afraid, then he's breaking one of his vows on satyagraha and his definition of ahimsa. So he said, no, I don't want any protection, I don't want anyone to be searched when they come and see me or offer me prayers. And this obviously ended up being his downfall, because the person who shot him could have easily have been searched before they came to see him. And so he shot him, and in the film the Ben Kingsley, the script is "Oh God," but he actually said, "Hey Ram." Ram is obviously one of the incarnations of God before Krishna. So "Hey Ram." So it's interesting, because the Bhagavad Gita says whatever thought or words are on your lips or on your mind, and I'm misquoting here, that form you should attain in your next life without fail. And so if you have the thought of God on your mind, or even in Gandhi's case, he's saying the word Ram, then that is obviously that's essentially liberation, isn't it? It's not that we're in a position to say that, but that's essentially what it means. Because when at the point of death, usually it's a culmination of all the events of your life is usually what thought is at the end, and that's why it's placed so much emphasis on that, or Krishna places so much emphasis on that particular point for the scripture. Yeah. Do you want to finish now, Mike? You're going to say something?
I'm going to say something different. What you just said reminded me of that story of the cobra with Gandhi in the autobiography, where they said, if there is a cobra, should I kill it? And he said that would violate two principles. And I would have thought, okay, it violates ahimsa, I would have thought that, but he also said fearlessness, right? Because just because you're afraid of the cobra doesn't mean you have to kill it, right? So if you're not afraid, why do you have any reason? So fear is oftentimes, I think, a reason that gets people to do defensive actions or violent actions. And if you don't have fear, and amazing that detail that you just mentioned, that he wasn't searching anyone for weapons at his rallies. That is pretty special. Yeah, and I guess he went when his time has come, right? He kind of finished his work. Amazing.
There is tons of work by Gandhi, and his renunciate life. He definitely did lead that before Guruji initiated him into Kriya Yoga, him and his cohort. which is it's a beautiful thing, really. A question actually did arise in my mind when reading about Gandhi and the life of yoga in general. He was a renunciant. You know, he took his wealth and distributed it to the poor. And typically, I think when people talk about yoga, they think, you know, if you're a yogi, you renounce things. You're going to send us back to the Stone Age. What's our view on this, you know, with renunciation? Is it necessary in the practice of yoga? I've got my own view. I think it's very positive, but I think it's viewed generally quite negative, isn't it? Renunciation and things like this. That it's not going with the flow of life in progression and advancement of technology and science. Mike, what's your take?
I think complete renunciation is maybe easier than renouncing a thing here and there while living in the world. And Guruji kind of told us that in the Dwapara Yuga, I mean, there are still people who live the life of the ascetics, but that's not really the main path he's teaching. He's like teaching you be in the world, but not of the world. You use the cell phone, but the cell phone doesn't control you. You use the technologies to do work for God, but that doesn't mean that you abuse them. And I feel like striking that balance is almost harder than renouncing everything, in my opinion.
Yeah. Phil?
I think as well, it's probably harder today than it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. I think, you know, the way society has evolved, it's so competitive. I think it's probably not many people even know that full renunciation is a thing. You know, most people will probably be shocked by the idea of it. They probably don't think many people are actually doing it these days. But yeah, I love that we have some great examples of householder yogis, though, to show us that it can be done. You don't have to go to that extreme. You know, in the SRF lineage itself, we have Yukteswar Giri and Lahiri Mahashai. Well, until Sri Yukteswar Giri's wife died, he was a householder, right? Lahiri was, and Rajasi as well. So it's great for me to see that example of someone like Rajasi being a self-made multimillionaire. He would probably be maybe around about a billionaire if he was alive today, or at least hundreds of millions, like the kind of money he was making. And the fact that he reached the goal in this lifetime, whilst, you know, having that, well, like you said, living in the world but not of it. But great examples there to show us that it's possible. We don't have to go to that extreme if it's not our path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's so many ways that, you know, you could cut this cake of truth in a way, but I always go back to my yoga conversation where, you know, we're in a Dvapara Yuga, we came out of Kali Yuga. It's interesting to me, you see examples around the world where there's some countries or continents that are kind of skipping the steps of some technology advances that we've had. So they're able to have wireless, you know, internet instead of cable coming in. So the infrastructure isn't necessary. So it's kind of getting from a more gross to more subtle state of, you know, technological advancement. I just wonder, you know, you look at all these great saints and you know, we hear stories about cities and communication, you know, telepathy and biolocation, you know, these kind of stories that maybe if we were to, you know, focus more on the inside development, there wouldn't be the need for such, you know, technological progression, because, you know, what do you need a phone for if you could telepathically, you know, talk to your, you know, best friend, you know, in 30,000 miles away or something. Guruji was called by Sri Yukteswar, you know, from, you know, oceans of differences between them. So I just think that almost these things are here to amuse us in the short term. In some ways, the material world is to keep us in the illusion, but they're not renunciants. Life is maybe the more straight, direct path to advancement in society, right? But it's interesting to play with the idea, because science, you know, is obviously doing such great advancements for, you know, improving quality of life and so on and so forth. So it's a debate that you could probably have for quite a while. But just thought I'd throw the question out there. But we can move on unless anybody has any more that they would like to add on Gandhi for now.
I could speak on him for days.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Well, thank you, Gandhi. We'll move on from there to another individual who is a pretty amazing individual himself, is Richard Wright, who appears in the documentary, as mentioned at the top of the minute. He's talking really about Guruji Yogananda meeting Sri Yukteswar Giri. And in the minute he talks, he says that Master could hardly wait until he got to meet his Master. It was indescribable, the meeting between the two. Master dropped to his knees, touched his feet of Sri Yukteswar Giri. Sri Yukteswar was welcoming back his triumphant son. So we see a little snippet of what he says there, and we see him in his elder years, sitting in a chair, discussing the meetings, his eyes twinkling, with excitement still. So it's a lovely little shot of him. But we know more really of what happened, at that time between Sri Yukteswar Giri and Guruji, as we see in the autobiography of Yogi. So we can talk about that in a minute, but maybe if we can just pause before we go onto that scene that they're describing and talk about Richard Wright himself. So he appears a few times, in the documentary. So we can talk a little bit more about him now today. So I think maybe Mike, would you want to jump into that card and just read the first bit there? That for 10 years, Richard Wright was one of the Guru's closest personal assistants, and we can look at the background of Richard Wright in a bit more detail. And this is some information, actually, if anybody's interested to jump on the Yogananda site.wordpress.com. There's a really nice tribute to Richard Wright there, if they want more information.
For 10 years, Richard Wright was one of the Guru's close personal assistants, rendering him enormous help in the early years of SRF. Though he never took monastic vows, Mr. Wright lived at the Mount Washington ashram as a single person, beginning in late 1932. He was an original member of the board of directors of SRF when it was incorporated in 1935, and was elected secretary at that time. He assisted Paramahansa Ji with his lecture tours and class series all over the United States. He also helped to inaugurate the comprehensive home study series of SRF lessons, through which the self-realization teachings and meditation techniques have become a way of life and path to God for countless persons all over the world. Writing to Rajarsi Chanakananda in 1934, Paramahansa Ji noted, "Of all workers, I find Dick Wright the most intelligent, faithful." That's high praise.
Wow.
Very high praise. Very high praise. And something struck me there as well. He didn't take monastic vows. And we know that he was the elder brother of Sri Daya Mata, and their sister Ananda Mata entered the monastic path as well a short time after Daya Mataji, and served on the board of directors of SRF for more than half a century. So their mother, I might not pronounce this correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, Shyama Mata, I think. Shyama Mata also became a nun and was highly esteemed by Paramahansa Ji, whom she served faithfully for many years. So the younger brother, the late Dale Wright, was another lifelong follower of SRF teachings. So it was a whole family of devotees and nuns. And it struck me, I wonder why. I don't have the personal information on this, but I wonder why he never took the monastic vows. I imagine, being such a close follower of Yogananda, that he was probably living a life of a renunciate in many ways. So it might be quite a natural step and path for him to take. So I just wonder what the backstory of that was. But Mike, do you want to jump in here?
I wish I had the backstory, but I don't. I just can make some remarks on this. The ashram life started already 3 years before Guruji went to India, right? So there must have been monastics already at Mother Center when he came. However, Guruji chose not to travel with any of his monastics, right? He traveled with Dick Wright and Miss Bletch, right? So that one was interesting. Maybe that was kind of because of the appearance or something. I don't really know, but it's interesting. And imagine you're Richard Wright. I thought of this question a few times. Like, imagine you spend so much time, you spend your whole life with Yogananda, and you are also living by yourself. I'm guessing he would also have had a lot of talks about it with Guruji, and maybe that was just the way it was supposed to be for him this lifetime.
Yeah, exactly. It would have been such a blessing to share these journeys and the life with Yogananda that he did. So I'm sure he's building up some good karma for sure. Priyank, would you be able to share your screen and show the picture that I put in the card? I thought was really cool. Again, find it on the website, Yogananda site. And if you can just open that picture and then share your screen on it.
This one?
Yeah, for people who are maybe watching on YouTube, you can see here below, clockwise from upper right, Paramahansa Yogananda with Richard Wright and Swami Sri Yukteswar in religious procession. And that's happening currently in the minute, really, when Yogananda returned to India, Calcutta in 1935. And then in Egypt, 1935, was with renowned Catholic mystic, Therese Newman, Germany in 1935 on a boat. So we can see him in these pictures, just sharing such a cool journey with Paramahansa Yogananda. And in one picture, he's touching the feet of Paramahansa Yogananda, the bare feet of Paramahansa Yogananda. So clearly, very devout, and held reverence with Yogananda there. So I thought just some nice pictures. He usually is the one taking the pictures and taking the recordings, but there's some of him in contrast, where he's seen in the documentary quite elderly, and of course has since passed away. So maybe, Priyank, you can stop sharing your screen now. I'll just read out a little bit here on his final moments. Richard Wright was permitted with a joy and divine peace that uplifted all around him. And there's a note here that I'll read it. I thought it was quite beautiful. One of the nurses that was taking care of Richard Wright said, "I remember when I first met him, he seemed like such a big man to me, but not only physically, but his presence just seemed to fill the whole room. He was very dignified, very quiet. As time went on, something else also emerged from him. It was such a sweet purity, so very beautiful to experience. He was always so thankful for anything that you ever did. He never complained about anything. It was such a blessing to be in his presence. Not long before Christmas, Mr. Wright told his nurse that he would be there for the holidays, but then, 'I am going home,' he said. 'What is it like your home?' the nurse asked him. He looked at me with those light blue sparkling eyes, a very full smile, and said, 'It's beautiful.' 4 days after the spiritual celebration of Paramahansaji's birthday on the 5th of January, he left his body for the bliss and freedom of heavenly realms." So I thought that was quite a touching note there. Clearly, in his last days, having a peace and presence about him, and maybe Guruji was certainly with him, showing him what was there for him afterwards. So beautiful. So shall we move on then? Maybe Mike, do you want to jump in and say one more thing on Richard Wright?
He plays such a big role, especially if you read the autobiography of a yogi. He's in there quite a lot. Guruji uses his diary a lot to describe the things that he saw in India, because he just loved his perspective as a Westerner going to India and seeing, for example, the ghats in Benares, or the different masters. He was so blessed. He was, I think, one of the only Westerners who got to see Swami Sri Yukteswar, right? And of course, I always have to mention he he fainted when Therese Neumann had her stigmatized. But he was there for all of this, so he's a very important person, and Guruji said he was very helpful. And I, for example, didn't even know that he was one of the founding members of the SRF board of directors when we just read that. Very interesting.
He was held in the highest esteem, for sure. Guruji really was very, very fond of him. No doubt, had a strong spiritual connection with him. So, we see great scenes, in the minute, and scenes where goats are just flooding the streets in India. They're welcome back. Guruji's welcome back to India, and we see these scenes that are very unique. Phil, you mentioned at the top of the recording that there is a very rare video of Guruji and Sri Yukteswar together, and I suppose we can thank Richard Wright for that. And it's so awesome. I kept looking at the clip where Guruji, I think, is sitting down and Sri Yukteswar Ji is kind of standing above him. I looked at it and thought, is he wearing sunglasses or is he wearing glasses, or what's he wearing? Because his eyes were just, it looked like they were, huge and glistening, but I thought maybe it's sunglasses or something. But you can see, he's very, very happy, Sri Yukteswar Ji, to have Guruji back. I just thought that was quite a cool little clip, just standing kind of.
They look like glasses, and Yogananda's eating, isn't he, on the floor, looking up at him. It's a beautiful shot. Beautiful shot.
Yeah, it's just very playful, and Richard Wright describes Sri Yukteswar Ji as very playful, but I think he describes his stature just very upright and firm, and he had been filled with renunciant life and made quite hardened through that, but he also had this big kind of play nose that he kind of twitched and played with a little bit. I believe like a child or something. He described him as in moments like that, very playful, and you could just see his joy, with being reconnected in physical form with Yogananda again. So I thought that scene, it was such a great inclusion in this minute. But maybe, Priyank, do you want to read out Richard Wright's description of this meeting of Yogananda and Sri Yukteswar Ji?
Yeah. In grave humility, I walked behind Yogananda Ji into the courtyard within the hermitage walls. Hearts beating fast, we proceeded up some old cement steps, trod no doubt by myriads of truth seekers. The tension grew keener and keener as we strode on. Before us, near the head of the stairs, quietly appeared the great one, Swami Sri Yukteswar Ji, standing in the noble pose of a sage. My heart heaved and swelled as I felt myself blessed by the privilege of being in his sublime presence. Tears blurred my eager sight when Yogananda Ji dropped to his knees and with bowed head offered his soul's gratitude and greeting, touching with his hands his guru's feet, and then in humble obeisance his own head. He rose then and was embraced on both sides on the bosom by Sri Yukteswar Ji. No words passed at the beginning, but the most intense feeling was expressed in the mute phrases of the soul. How their eyes sparkled and were fired with the warmth of renewed soul union. A tender vibration surged through the quiet patio, and even the sun eluded the clouds to add a sudden blaze of glory. On bended knee before the master, I gave my own unexpressed love and thanks, touching his feet, calloused by time and service, and receiving his blessing. I stood then and faced two beautiful deep eyes, smoldering with introspection, yet radiant with joy. We entered his sitting room, whose whole side opened to the outer balcony first seen from the street. The master braced himself against a worn Davenport sitting on a covered mattress on the cement floor. Yogananda ji and I sat near the Guru's feet with orange-colored pillows to lean against and ease our position on the straw mat.
Epic. And this was in the autobiography of a yogi. And as Mike said, Yogananda deferred to Richard Wright's comments himself instead of describing it himself. So
he said words. He said words for meeting with Guruji. For my meeting with reunion with Sri Yukteswar, words fail me. So I will have to refer you to Dick's diary. Oh, that's just phenomenal, isn't it? So Dick has got a place in history amongst very few. His direct words are written in one of the most important books of our generation.
Yeah, such a blessing, isn't it, for Richard Wright? So that's such a great reconnecting moment, isn't it, with Guruji and everything he's been accomplishing in the United States. And I like there when it said no words were spoken. My imagination's running wild with, thinking, were they communicating at light speed, through telepathy or something instead? But actually, we talk about silence, and we talk about, Mahatma Gandhi taking a vow of silence and be still and know that I am God, in the Bible and these things, and be still and listen to Om, and meditate on the Om in self-realization fellowship. So I'm sure the no words passed at the beginning was simply to embrace the silence and the peace of the moment. Priyank, do you want to
excellently picked up there, Chris, because my wife and I were just discussing this on the way back from the retreat. Brother Smaranananda ji's talk on how to deepen your meditations, and one of the bits he said was, a sage once was asked by a lay person, and he said, what did you do whilst you were meditating? And the sage said, I was communing with God. And then the man asked, what did you say to God? And the sage said, nothing, I was listening. And then the man asked, what did God say to you? And the sage said, nothing, he was also listening. And then Smarananda said, isn't that the most deepest and profound communion you can have, where no words need to be exchanged, you're just sitting in each other's presence? And isn't that a beautiful way to sit in the stillness after your meditation practices? Just to be in that space, knowing that you and God are communing, but no words need to be spoken, no thoughts need to be thought. It's just a stunning thought. So yeah, well picked up on.
And I would dramatically say, let's end the minute analysis in silence. But I think just to wrap up, that it's such a great minute, and it's packed full of action. We see so many great shots of Guruji, arriving in India, Mahatma Gandhi there, Richard Wright, and then a depiction with an actor standing quite dramatically on, I think, a Spanish veranda. Is that how it's described in the autobiography of a yogi? Yukteswar Giri had a 2-story building as an ashram that was done in Spanish architecture, I think. So yeah, we see all these scenes depicted in the documentary, and it's all done very well. And then, of course, the epic film of Guruji with his guru, with Sri Yukteswar. So
made all the more epic by the very morose music and like this very sweet melody that's being played on, I think, on a violin or a harmonium. But it's absolutely beautiful. The music adds to that feeling of reverence and that silent communion that they were having. No words needing to be, no words ruining the moment with grossness of words. Just as that's pretty much all we do on our podcast, but we'll gloss over that.
Hypocrisy. The hypocrisy. Oh gosh. Right. Well, I'll be silent for the rest of the day.
Yes.
So,
But
well,
the rest of my day is still pretty long, so maybe not.
yeah, it's more of a challenge for you, Mark. Yeah, but I'm sure you're up to it. I'm sure you're up to it. But
quit your job and go to the run to the hills.
Yeah, you might find you're pulled back just as quickly.
Your rent payments.
Not yet. Yeah, not yet. But with that, chaps.
No, Phil. No, I wanted to ask Phil one question. So we talked about Gandhi's initiation and his frame of mind. Phil just told us that he has just about to get his Kriya initiation. So tell us, what are your feelings right now? You must be ecstatic.
Yeah, ecstatic is one of them. Impatience also. Yeah, I came across Guruji about almost a year ago, actually. So I knew that I wanted Kriya Yoga initiation. I knew it was my path very quickly. So I've been really waiting for a year, enjoying the lessons, but still very impatient to get to Kriya. But yeah, definitely very excited. You know, I feel like as soon as I kind of signed the pledge and emailed it to SRF, I had a call with a monk. They just told me that it had been accepted. I think sometimes I have to ask people questions about things. But honestly, it feels like since around that time, I'm already receiving like more guidance from Guruji. Like I need to do the ritual at home, but from the SRF point of view, I've signed a pledge. You know, I'm a Kriya ban according to the organization. I just need to do the initiation, but I really do feel more of his presence already. Yeah, so stupidly excited. I will let you know how it goes.
Yeah, please do check in with us. Phil, well, I was speaking to him like a couple of weeks ago at the monk's visit when they were here at London, and he was telling me that as soon as the lesson arrives, you know, he's the lesson student, he's like opens the envelope and sits down for 4 hours. as soon as it arrives, I was like, wow, here, compare that to myself. And I'm like, oh, I've got a lesson to read. I need to make time.
I'm actually even more impatient than that, because I actually wait until it comes through on the app. The app comes before the lessons because I'm in the UK. So I even read it as soon as it comes through in the app. So it's, yeah, quite fanatical. Good lesson about patience there.
Inspiring.
All right.
I think this is the one area where impatience is a virtue.
True.
Yeah, good. There's oh, go ahead.
Just going to say, in the same way that Kriya is the only dogma.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, that was quite nice the way you said that. It's the one area that impatience. Yeah,
impatience and greed in this case.
True.
Are both beneficial qualities.
Yeah, Guruji talks about spiritual selfishness, right?
Mm.
So
we could flip turn all the sins now into into positives.
I'm not aggressive. I'm spiritually aggressive.
No hymns are in spirituality.
Yes.
Yes.
With that, chaps, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Jai Guru.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jai Guru.
Jai Guru.